everybody to another episode of Podsast. Today I have Mike Pappas from Modulate. Mike, great to have you on. Would love to get a quick, understanding of what Modulate is before we dive into your background and your journey.
Yeah, thanks for having me here, Chris. It's great to be chatting with you. So Modulate, our mission statement is pro-social voice intelligence. So we really want to facilitate in all of these different areas of the world where people are having conversations with each other, and you might be running into a culture conflict, or you might have people that are misbehaving and trying to harass each other, or various other ways that those interactions don't go as constructively and positively as we all want them to. And we want to help facilitate that. So the primary way we do that today is with our AI voice moderation tool called TalksMod. So
Okay.
we partner primarily with game studios like Call of Duty, Riot Games, Rec Room in the VR space, and help them identify hate speech, harassment, up to the really extreme stuff like, violent radicalization and other things that might happen on the platforms, so that they can take action against that very small percentage of bad actors and give everyone else the opportunity to have the really, wonderful and amazing gaming experiences that we all know and love.
Awesome. Very cool. And we've spoken a little bit before from one of the roundtables that we did when we were in Boston, and I think you had just brought on like Call of Duty at that time, and I'm just curious as to, when we were talking then, you guys kind of had built up this product first, right? And not necessarily knowing where the use case would be, and then you ended up in gaming. So how can you walk us through kind of like what that was like with your co-founders in terms of like developing a product first or technology first, and then figuring out the go-to-market?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know if it was developing a technology first so much as just kind of messing around with some tech first. So my co-founder Carter gets most of the credit.
Okay.
But he and I, we were in undergrad together. We were sort of keeping in touch outside of school. And he reached out to me one day saying, hey, I've been messing around with a bunch of machine learning tech. And I think I might have figured out how you could make a real-time voice changer using machine learning. Do you think anyone might be interested in that? And that was kind of the start of it, was just like, hey, do you think there's anyone out there that might find this interesting? And yeah, we did. So we went out and started chatting with people, but you know, it was probably 2 years from that point of just kind of hacking away at the product before we could even prove to anyone other than the two of us that we had something there. Not only is just inventing any technology hard, but voice is very, very finicky.
Mhm.
If you think about generating an image, if one pixel is out of place, most
Mhm.
people don't even notice. Your brain can just parse it super easily. If you get the equivalent of one pixel out of place for audio, you will notice, you will hear those artifacts. It will be unpleasant. So it really requires next level precision. So we spent several years just working on that in our free time, nights and weekends, hacking away until we had something that we thought we could use to really build interest. At that point, it was early 2018. We left our jobs and basically set aside an entire year to just full time go talk to everyone we could think of in every possible industry and see who would express interest. I remember we talked to one of the larger players in the audiobook space, and we were fairly naive founders, and so we got in and we're chatting with this big brand, and they're saying, "Oh, this is really cool technology," and we're hearing, "Oh my God, we're going to be millionaires." And now I can look back at those conversations and realize they had no use case. They had no idea how to use this. They were just curious to hear about this thing as people more than as professionals. Um, and so we had a lot of those conversations where neither of us had a business background. We didn't quite know how to really suss out the good leads from the bad, until finally we landed in an environment that kind of beat us over the head with a hammer of actual good leads. And that was gaming, where we went to talk to some of those studios. And instead of saying, oh, that's so cool, or I wonder what we could do with that, it was, the thing you've built is called voice skins. We've been waiting for this for 5 years. When will it be ready?
Interesting.
That's a signal that tells you, all right, you're in the right place. And we did, of course, ultimately pivot from that, in part because of ethical concerns, in part because that voice skins application was really enticing as a nice to have, but when COVID struck and no one had time to do anything extra, nice to haves kind of fell away. And so we identified, well, actually, the reason the games wanted these voice skins was to get more people feeling comfortable participating in voice chat. And so, what if we took that problem statement and just reoriented ourselves as directly after that as possible?
Interesting. So the original product, when you say voice changing and voice skins, that's like me speaking and then being able to adopt somebody else's voice, like a celebrity's voice or something along those lines. Is that correct?
That's right. There's a I'm just going to say somewhat embarrassing video of me speaking with Barack Obama's vocal cords out there on the deep dark corners of the internet if someone knows where to look for it,
Got
as
it.
the first proof of concept of how the technology worked.
Very cool. Interesting. And so that, and you guys spent how long on that first iteration of the product? 3 years?
So Carter had written the first line of code on Christmas Day of 2015.
Okay.
Um, we really kind of identified that we needed to shift gears into the voice analytics side of things. I would say in early 2020, right around when COVID was sort of peaking. So we spent the better part of 4.5 years going after that voice changing product. And
Yep.
to be honest, like pivoting away from that, it hurt. I don't think we did it as cleanly as we could have or should have because we had developed such an attachment to that product. Um, but it in retrospect, it was absolutely the right decision. I think the benefit of having worked on that tech, it was not that we knew better than all of the industry and could just build something that they needed without talking to them. But the skills that we developed by building this technology, understanding human emotion, understanding how to build audio processing machine learning that works at very high fidelity, that works very cost effectively, all of those equipped us to be the company that could solve the real immediate problems that people had in the voice moderation space. If we hadn't started by pushing ourselves to develop something really unique, where we had to invent a lot of these techniques for hyper efficient machine learning and for emotion understanding and for all that, then we wouldn't have been able to capitalize on understanding that market need. We wouldn't have had the tools to actually build something transformative there.
Absolutely. I mean, that's it. I think I would love to learn a little bit more when you said, you didn't do as gracefully as you think you could have. I mean, can you ever pivot really gracefully, right? I mean, I think it's because of the fact that it is like, building a business and building a product is like raising a child to a certain degree.
Yeah.
And, so it's almost like pushing this child aside to bring in a new one is a big, big thing. So makes a
Yeah.
ton of sense. When you guys did make the pivot, right, into that, was it, uh, I know it was inspired by your conversations with the gaming companies. Was that a problem statement that you guys floated around with them now that you had that engagement or relationship before you guys ended up doing a true pivot? Or was that kind of a self-evolution and going through that?
Yeah, I mean, like they had been beating us over the head with this for a while, and we had just taken a bit to see it. So it wasn't, we had this idea and let's go validate it with them. It's we finally started listening to them and saying, okay, everyone's been asking for this. Maybe it's actually worth trying to build that. And then as soon as we started taking it back to them and everyone's kind of tripping over themselves saying, yes, this, we've been waiting for the, like, even compared to the reaction that we got with the voice skins was, yes, we know what this is and we have a use for it.
Mhm.
But the voice moderation thing was, oh my God, gimme. It
Yeah.
was like, finally, we need this, hand it to me, even when it was in sort of the barest bones. And for for probably a year and a half, Toxmod was, I'll just say, not the most aesthetically pleasing app, right? Like there was a lot of just simple polish stuff that we didn't get to for a while, in large part because people just saw like the bare bones version of the product and that was enough. They needed it. They like it clearly worked. There was actual functionality to it. Anything else they could deal with later. And so we ended up getting sort of pushed really hard to just expand the functionality, and only really had the moment to breathe and really start saying, hey, let's make sure that this is actually not aesthetic for aesthetic's sake, but a little bit easier to actually use for the average consumer, produce a little bit nicer readouts for executives, that kind of stuff. That is really valuable. But we were sort of moving so fast into this entirely new ecosystem that it took a while for us to build out what I would normally kind of call table stakes for a SaaS product.
Interesting. And how long ago was that?
So I mean, the transition, like I said, was around the beginning of 2020. I would say it took us kind of a year and a half or so for that transition to kind of completely settle into the marrow of the company.
Yep.
And then maybe another 6 months. So we're probably talking early 2023 was
Okay.
the point at which we had enough customers using the product
Yep.
and really, poking and prodding at it, that we felt truly confident that we had all of the pieces there. There was no other like core functionality that we needed to bring in, and we could, not exactly slow down, but take a moment to work in a different direction and start to really reintegrate the product into something that's really complete and whole.
Okay. Got it. And do you feel like you guys are there now, or are you still in the process of getting to that where you again mentioned the table stakes of a SaaS product?
No, I think we're there now. I think we just had the Game Developer Conference GDC in San Francisco just a couple weeks ago. It's been very interesting kind of marking our progress through our attendance of that conference. 5 years ago we went out there, we knew no one, had no idea what we were doing. This year it wasn't even just that, we were members of the industry, we were connected, we knew who we were talking to. But I think this was the first year that people kind of were taking for granted that, oh yeah, we know what Modulate does, and it's kind of the table stakes option for this kind of thing. Like at
Yeah.
some point we moved from being the, new startup trying to break into the space to being the obvious answer for anyone in the industry who's trying to build this kind of thing.
Yeah.
I credit our marketing team on a lot of amazing work to educate. This was again a brand new type of product. I credit a lot of folks on our team for creating that path, but it definitely does feel like at this point, it's not just that there is product market fit, but that we actually have taken that position as the front runner in this particular market. That
Yeah.
has now given us the opportunity to start reflecting on what might be coming next in the next couple of years and how can we continue to expand and innovate there.
Yeah. Absolutely. Curious to kind of like that the description you say of Tox Mod, right? Is that something again where you guys coined that terminology and created a category? Or was that Tox Mod, was that something like again similar to like voice skins that existed in the gaming world that you guys weren't aware of? I'm just curious.
So people had obviously considered like what if you could moderate voice? But they had run into a pretty firm wall, which is transcribing audio is extraordinarily expensive.
Mhm.
Even today, if you look at something like Amazon Transcribe, you're probably paying over $1 per hour of audio that you're trying to process. If you're one of the big game companies that might have tens or even hundreds of millions of hours of audio per month, you can't do that, right? It's just a complete non-starter. And so what the game industry had largely done is they had looked at that math and said, well, I guess we're just going to never moderate voice chat.
Mm.
And some of them had just kind of given up entirely. Some of them had said, well, we'll at least ask people to report harmful audio, and then we can listen to that because that's a much smaller volume than the total set of things. But no one was really considering what it would mean to be able to analyze all of that audio in a privacy respecting way at scale. So that was the thing that we came in. And I think because so many people had imagined it once and run into the wall and walked away, it was almost more surprising than something that they had never imagined at all. And we had to kind of teach folks, how do you actually use this tool? It's not just a moderation tool anymore. It's now also a window
Yeah.
into understanding your ecosystem. And just one really quick example, like we've worked with some very established folks in the trust and safety space who've been in the games industry for 20 years. And if you asked them, what are the problems that people face? What kind of harassment and hate do they face? They could have told you about some really horrible stuff.
Yeah.
But it was really hard for those people to understand the prevalence of that toxicity. And I think everyone had kind of internalized, yes, there's this really terrible stuff, but it happens to like a couple people a year and it just gets made a lot of deal in the news and stuff like that. But it's not really that common. And then we would turn on ToxMod and we would find you 1,000 of those things within the first hour.
Well,
And it was a complete change in perspective of realizing this is not a thing that hurts a few unlucky people, but this is actually a pervasive part of the community norms that have evolved here. And that completely changes your approach to how do you actually want to improve that ecosystem moving forward. So it's that kind of stuff that goes way beyond just is something bad happening or not, but giving you a much deeper understanding of why is something bad happening? Where is that coming from? How did it evolve to be this way?
interesting. Yeah, I mean, I have so many questions around how you guys then go tackle something like that, where people who are industry veterans almost think it's impossible, right? And I guess like crediting to the fact that you guys went so deep on the voice changing technology and then having probably learned what is possible through going through that endeavor, then being able to, like, if you were presented with that latter problem first, probably would have felt like, okay, everybody else tried it already, and you probably wouldn't have had the confidence to tackle it, perhaps.
I I think that's absolutely right. Yeah, if we hadn't invested those years trying to build the voice changing stuff, then I
Yeah.
think we would have heard this and said, "Yeah, you're all probably right that it's
Yeah.
impossible."
Yeah.
It's only because we had this experience of doing something nearby enough to make us experts, but not so close that we ran into the same ruts that everyone else ran into when they were trying to approach it the conventional way.
Interesting. Um, I mean, that's a great narrative, I feel like, right? I mean, from 2015-ish to now, and like going through half that time almost with two different products. Um, that, and then even that being said, just, kind of being at GDC and then being able to like be kind of like the top, top dog in the category that you guys basically helped create. Um, Talk us through what that looks like, right? I mean, I guess there's the very like personal, I think like emotional experience that's attached to that, because it is kind of like bringing up a child and now seeing it mature and the whole nine. And but more, I guess, like more importantly, from just kind of now that you guys are out there and people are aware of this category, how do you look at competition now? Is there in fact competition out there? Are there people challenging your technology with new technology, right? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean there's a ton of stuff to talk about there, but I'll say like when we first started getting into this space, I reached out to a couple of folks from another company that did text moderation in gaming.
Yeah.
Um, and the folks there could very easily have said, "We're gonna try and build our own voice thing. You're a competitor. We're gonna steer clear." But instead, like the CEO and head of trust and safety from this company spent hours with me teaching me about the ecosystem, teaching me about the challenges they've faced, introducing me to other people in the ecosystem. And I would like ask them about this. Like I'm so floored and appreciative, but like, why are you doing this? And the answer they would just give is like, look, there is so much trust and safety work to do. There is room for everyone. It's not a competitive thing. It's a rising tide lifts all boats. The better we can all collectively do, the more people appreciate this work, the better a position we're all going to be in. So I've really tried to sort of live that and pass it on myself. And I've had the opportunity in the last few years to be in that position of being the more experienced entrepreneur, talking with someone that's trying to break into the space. Including one company that got acquired about a year or so ago that was pretty much a straight up competitor of ours. And I really tried to, take that energy that I had learned from my own advisors into the space and just have an open conversation with them and talk about, yeah, like here's where we've been successful. Here's where you're probably going to run into challenges if you want to follow in our footsteps. Here's some opportunities that we didn't have the chance to go after that maybe you'd be better equipped to go after. Again, like it's a huge space. There's so much work to do.
Yeah.
Um, so I feel like, you know, it's kind of a privilege to be in the position that we're at now, where I can feel stable enough about the company
Yeah.
that I don't need to be terrified of being dislodged every day. And don't get me wrong, like we're not going to be complacent. We're obviously going to keep innovating and pushing, but I'm sure you appreciate and hear a lot from other founders as well. Like there's definitely that period of time for maybe a year or two at least that you're just waking up in a cold sweat, like, oh God, someone has probably just completely derailed my company. Someone announced some big new AI model, whatever. And to not have that, to realize that we're no longer just a tech exhibition, but we're a brand, we're a partner. We have real relationships that mean we have a more stable position in the space. It has been a genuine blessing, not only for sort of my own well-being, but for my ability and comfort level to then give back to others that are trying to come into the ecosystem too.
Yeah. I mean, I do hear that, and I think the only underlying variable that's somewhat consistent is time, right? Like time to have built enough to have that, you know, first movers advantage, but also just like time to have um tried so many things and then failed so many things and learned so many things to kind of get to a place where you have that experience, that level of confidence in what you've built out. Um, I think going through that, and this is maybe a little bit more, personal, but like going through that patience you're talking about from like not about 9 years of like going through this initial endeavor till now. I would imagine it's probably if there's any kind of like of that contentment that you're feeling now, probably it's only been within the past year or 2 years, maybe.
Yeah.
But leading up to that, how was that journey? And when did you realize, I guess, now that you're speaking about, having a place at the table and like feeling that comfortability to a certain degree of where you guys have come from. Um, was that like a slow realization, or was it, like at some point you're like, oh, okay, there is there is
Yeah.
where I was 2 years ago or even a year ago, and I feel different. I feel like I now have a shift in perspective. Walk us through what that looks like.
I've
That's what founders
noticed,
out there that are in the middle of it, right?
yeah, like I've noticed at various points that like, oh wow, we've come pretty far. But I'll say most of my experience has not been. I don't even want to say it as like not been looking behind me. It's just like most of my experience has been so caught up in the moment that it's very easy to lose track of how far you've come. And I think one of the reasons I've really enjoyed GDC, other than just the conference event, is it serves as this very natural benchmark for you to reflect upon, like what were you doing at this conference last year? What are you doing this year? And really see that. So I think that conference in particular has been a huge, help for me in having that perspective. I'll also say, like, just because I'm not waking up worried, like, oh God, someone has just completely replaced our company, doesn't mean I don't have things that make it hard to fall asleep at night, right? There's always new challenges to come after. But I think for me, a lot of both the positive and the fear, for lack of a better term, comes from looking at the team.
Mm,
Carter and I had this experience very early on at Modulate where we had about 4 other members of the team, and we made the disastrous decision to take a day trip from Boston to San Francisco to do like 2 meetings, and then flew back on a red eye, arrived back in Boston at like 10 in the morning, and planned to go straight to the office. And so we were just miserable coming off the plane, dragged our carcasses to the office, and we're about to open the door, and it's a door with a big glass panel, and so you can see in. And we realize we're looking in, and there's our team like chatting animatedly with each other. 2 of them are up at a whiteboard, one of them's coding something. Like, Modulate was happening even without us there.
mm,
And that first moment of experiencing that was just a really powerful memory. And I think as the team has grown and we're now like 45 people, I still have some of those moments sometimes where I'll just go out of my office and I'll look around and I'll be hit by that wave. Though I'll admit, like, now that wave is also accompanied by like, I'm responsible for 45 people's livelihoods. I'd better do it right. Like that, there's a little bit of anxiety that comes from that. Um, but I think that's good and healthy for a leader too. Like I think you should remember that, you're not just creating some cool idea, but real people are trusting you with, again, their lives, their ability to put food on the table for their families. That is, a source of anxiety to a degree, but it's also a source of energy and empowerment that these incredible people, for whatever reason, seem to believe in me and believe in Carter and believe in our ability to push that forward. And that certainly energizes and makes me feel that much more excited to come in as well.
Yeah, I mean, I will say just kind of from our initial meeting and now, you you have a combination of empathy with your technical background, which is not very common, I think, with some people that I've met in the past historically from technical founders. That empathy, I'm curious, has that do you feel like that's more natural to you? And I don't know, how your co-founder is with that too, or is that something that, you mentioned that you're in this world of like seeing how ultimately, you know, the spectrum of humanity in like how they engage with one another, right? And you've been exposed to that. So I don't know if that's also influenced you in any way. But I'd be curious.
Yeah, I think being in trust and safety definitely has influenced me. Like the first, even before I got in touch with those couple advisors that I mentioned earlier, like the first person ever in trust and safety that I just cold reached out to ask if I could chat. I mentioned to them like, yeah, I'm trying to like read through transcripts of a lot of this hate speech and stuff to understand how we could be detecting it. And the first thing I remember them saying is like, "Oh my God, do you need a hug?" Just like there's this general feeling in trust and safety of like, yeah, you know what bad and what pain looks like, and you can just a little bit more easily empathize and see it as part of your job to just help support the people around you.
Mhm.
I think for me, I come at things like empathy from a very weird place. We have these panel discussions at Modulate where we'll invite folks onto the panel based on different aspects of their identity. So if people want to speak about, being an immigrant in the United States and just share the experience and give people more insight into how they can be supportive to them. Or in one case, we did a neurodiversity panel where I elected to speak on that. I would certainly say I think, having grown up, having experienced different things, I don't feel like I operate in what you would call a neurotypical way. And one of the things that I remember talking to the team about there is, as I say it, all of my social skills are made of math. When I was a kid and I was a super mathy, nerdy kid, I looked at everyone socializing around me and just everything was illogical, right? It was very much that stupid little like Spock thing. Like everything was illogical and it didn't make any sense. And why are they doing it this way? They should do it this other way instead. And it took me a lot to kind of overcome that and really start to understand what was going on. And I think there's some people that didn't have whatever magic combination of the right friends, the right ecosystem, the right sort of family support that I did that somehow managed to sort of pull me out of that.
Mhm.
But I didn't emerge from that with an intuition for how to socialize with people or an intuition of how to empathize with people. What happened was I was able to combine this math, behavioral economics and game theory and all of these different things that I was so into, and I would start to understand, oh, the reason people are interacting with each other, I can translate that into this game theory term
Mhm.
of, what is trust if it's not, belief that they're going to collaborate with you on the next iteration of the prisoner's dilemma. And that sounds a little bit cheesy, but for me it really did help to be able to understand what these things reduce to. And I think for building a team and being a leader, the skill that that's given me is I am not the big inspirational founder who goes up and gives one speech and everyone's cheering, and then 3 hours later they realize, like, did he actually say anything specifically? Like, I'm not that guy. I fall extremely on the other side of the spectrum. I sometimes am maybe less energizing, less inspirational than I could be because I'm so obsessed with being precise.
Mhm.
But what I can do is I can break down why I feel a certain way about something or why I'm operating in a certain way in really concrete, consistent ways. And I think that has allowed me to build trust with the team, where
Yeah.
even if they often know if I need a hug, Mike's maybe not the perfect person to go to for a hug, that they know that that's not because I don't care about them. And they know that if they want someone to support them in breaking through whatever problem they're in the middle of, I'm going to be able to translate how I think into their language by using these building blocks. And so I'm going to be able to sort of support them and help them grow in the ways that they all want to as well.
Interesting. It's a very like scientific way of approaching relationships, which I think makes you a great candidate for what you guys are building now. Because I think it is, yeah, you're basically quantifying the inflections of tonality and um, triggered by emotion, right? So it's very interesting.
Exactly. Yeah. Like a lot of the fundamental work we're doing is building mathematical models that
Yeah,
need to understand the nuances of humans. And
yeah,
if I can do it, then these things that have way more horsepower and way, smarter people designing the way that they're thinking than whatever I've been able to do in my own brain, it makes me feel kind of optimistic about what we're ultimately going to be able to understand and achieve there.
yeah. Um, as we're wrapping up on time, I just want to have a few more questions that we didn't even get to go into, but maybe you can talk a little bit about them, which is the idea of, I read through your bio and just how you prioritize ethics as part of how you guys look at product and the combination of those two things, which don't necessarily always go hand in hand. So I'm curious as to, how did you when did that was that always a priority? Did it evolve into a priority? And then how do you execute on
Yeah.
ethics, especially in an instance where, as a moderating tool, you are in this position of power to how do you leverage that power, but in an ethical way? And how do you define ethical, I guess, as part of that experience?
That's been there from the beginning. That was a core part of Carter's and my discussions early on. And again, going back to that, like, social skills are made in math, our company values we have in like prioritized order of, if you need to make a trade-off, here's how you trade things off. And the very root priority that trumps everything else is, if we're not going to be able to live with ourselves for having done it, if we're not going to be able to sleep at night, we just don't do it. And if
Mm,
that means the company dies, then so be it. We don't think that does mean the company dies. We think you can be an ethical business and still be extremely successful. But we've been clear with ourselves from the beginning. We don't want success for success's sake. We want to do this the right way. Um, that manifests in different ways in different situations, but just one example of how this worked is, in trust and safety, you often have to deal with words that can be problematic or can be fine in different contexts. So
mhm,
the N word is one of these. A lot of folks identify that as just, it's a slur, it's bad. But a lot of Black and brown identifying players have reclaimed that word and will use it amongst their friends in a way that's positive.
yeah,
Some platforms that are overzealous in banning it end up kind of removing the ability for those people to have a positive experience with each other. So you need to differentiate, is it being used in that reclaimed positive way or not? You can't really do that just by looking at how the speaker is saying it. I could imitate how someone else says the N word when it's positive, but it's still probably not okay for me to be saying it. So we had a big company discussion when we were about 10, 15 people. How do we want to solve this? And
mm,
one of the topics that got brought up was, well, we could try to build a AI model to predict based on people's voice what their race or ethnicity is. And we had a big discussion about what are the advantages from this and what are the risks of how that model could be misused as well as misinterpreted, right? It doesn't have to be misused. Just if people believe it's saying something that it's not, that can do harm in and of itself. Um, and what I loved about that conversation, A, we decided not to pursue that we did not think it was an ethical thing. But B, what I, felt so proud about from a team building standpoint is we had a team member who at that point had been there for only 2 weeks. And I was so happy that he felt comfortable kind of raising his hand in the middle of this conversation and kind of conspicuously looking around the room and saying, Mike, do we really have the right people in the room to have this discussion? And at that time, we were a less diverse team, and he was absolutely right to point it out. And that actually prompted us to reach out to one of our first advisors, who was a Black woman who's also an academic that specifically studies this stuff, who was so excited to come in and share her expertise and help us think about these problems. But that a team member that was that new felt comfortable sort of calling out the CEO of, is this really a diverse enough group to have a meaningful conversation here? I don't think there's a lot of places where people can feel that level of comfort. So I was really gratified to see that we were able to have that conversation so openly and directly.
Interesting. Last question here is just kind of, you're building at this technology. Obviously, you're dominant in the gaming space right now. But how do you foresee this technology in, obviously there's a bunch of possible other use cases, some of which could also raise ethical questions of like, should you be in those spaces? But
Yep.
what do you think is next for you guys in terms of, where you think the company will be in 5 years in terms of expanding to other verticals, other industries, and what might that look like?
I mean, like you said, there's so many opportunities, but I think really thinking from the ethics first standpoint, one of the most powerful things that we can do, akin to this trust and safety application, is just identify when people are mistreating each other. Not necessarily to punish, but to educate, to support, but just recognize when those things are happening. So where do people mistreat each other? Well, it certainly can happen between people who know each other. But this kind of stuff probably happens most often between people that don't know each other that well, that are somewhat anonymous or at least kind of distanced from physical implications of what they're doing, that are in some kind of highly emotional situation that is, asymmetrical in some way. That's where you're likely to see, rage and frustration make itself known. So competitive games are one landscape for that. Another example, though, is call centers. If you're really irate and you're calling a call center, it's unfortunately not that uncommon for you to end up bullying the poor person on the other side of the phone, who it's not their fault that you didn't get your order or whatever happened, but the people get angry and people start sort of manifesting in that way. And so us being able to watch conversations like that, or online dating is another one where people are very vulnerable with each other, but there's a lot of risk for mistreatment there.
Yeah.
Being able to say, can we just sit on top of those conversations and just, again, we're not collecting all the data. This is not, 1984. This is not trying to be privacy, but it's just keeping a corner of an eye out to say, is something going wrong? Does someone need help? And be able to flag that to the platform when it's needed. I think there's, just for that alone, so much opportunity for us to continue to grow.
Yeah. So many things still could talk about, but don't want to keep you. So thank you so much for taking the time here and sharing your story, as well as just where the company's at, what you guys have built, which is super powerful, very compelling. Yeah, can imagine it in so many different instances, but also comes a lot of responsibility. And I'm glad it's in your hands in terms of the approach that you guys are coming at it with. Um, yeah, happy to share this with you and your team afterwards. But again, thanks for taking the time.
Same to you, Chris. Really enjoyed the conversation and appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit about our story.